In this video, we're going to talk about Sculptris Pro Mode. Sculptris Pro Mode is found here at the top of the screen, and what this does is it changes the way in which our brushes interact with the surface of the model, freeing us from having to worry about subdivision levels or Dynamesh. Sculptris Pro Mode basically introduces real-time tessellation, which is part of the program Sculptris, which is also available from Pixelogic. Now, let's look at our mesh here. I've got a generic sphere. I'll go to geometry and delete my lower subdivision levels because Sculptris Pro Mode requires just one subdivision level to work. Under the standard brush, if I draw a stroke, the stroke will perturb the points underneath the stroke to change the shape of the model. Now, if I turn on Sculptris Pro Mode and make the same stroke, you'll see that it tessellates the mesh as it draws that stroke. It adds geometry so it can create the shape that I'm asking for and make it as smooth as possible. If I turn my draw size down even smaller, it makes more geometry. So what's happening here is tessellation, and if you've watched my video on Decimation Master, you'll know that tessellation is where a quad mesh is sliced up into triangles. Areas of low detail have fewer triangles, and areas of high detail have more and smaller triangles. Now ZBrush is smart enough in Sculptris Pro Mode to see what type of shape you're trying to make. If you're working with a small draw size, it's going to make a finer stroke. A bigger draw size will make a bigger, less tessellated stroke. It will actually reduce polygons in those areas. So, how do we use this in practice? So as I'm working, if I take the move brush, for example, I don't need to worry about Sculptris. It's not going to need to tessellate the mesh as I work. It's just going to shift and move things around. If I go to the Clay Tubes brush, Sculptris Pro Mode does work for this particular brush, so as I'm sculpting, ZBrush is tessellating the mesh as I go. Now, Sculptris Pro Mode is great for sketching because, like I said, it frees you from any sort of concerns about topology or about having to Dynamesh your mesh. You don't have to stop at any one point and do control, click, and drag. It's just down to trying to create the form that you want to create. It's sort of ideal in that regard where you're just not worrying about the technical aspects of digital sculpting. You're just creating form. And that's really the ideal. That's what we're looking for as sculptors, I believe, is just being free from the tool. So all we need to do is sculpt. Now, as I'm working, if I press the Shift key, notice my brush turns orange. This is the smooth brush. If I smooth, you see that it slices up detail in areas that have low detail. If I turn my brush size down even smaller and smooth, it adds more geometry. If I turn my brush size up and smooth, then it decimates the area. Now, these controls for this brush are found under the stroke menu. If I go to stroke and tear this off, open Sculptris Pro, make sure that we're on a brush with Sculptris Pro turned on. There we are. We have adaptive size combined, subdivide, and undivide. Now, adaptive size, if I turn this off, then what that means is if I click and drag to draw a stroke and then create a bigger stroke, it's not going to subdivide that mesh depending on my brush size. If I take my subdivide size and turn this down, it will increase the subdivisions, but it'll be for every stroke size. The draw size will not control at all the level of tessellation. Now, if I turn off combined, what this means is that let's turn it on and I'll show you what I mean. If I've got a small brush stroke here that's very, very tessellated, turn up my draw size and do a bigger stroke across it. Do you see how it decimates where it crosses the stroke? If I turn off combined and do the same stroke, it will not decimate areas that are already detailed. So that's a way that if I've got an area of high detail, perhaps I've gone in, let's turn this back on and I'll create an area of high detail, like maybe I've created some kind of nose shape here and a mouth shape that I like. So we'll do little shapes here and here. All right, so I've got that, which has a lot of detail. Now maybe I want to take my standard brush, turn the draw size up, and I want to build up this area. By turning off combined, I can make these big broad brush strokes in this area, and it's not going to decimate any of the denser areas. It's just going to continue to tessellate areas that require it, and it's going to leave areas alone that do not need to be decimated. So let's turn combine back on. Now with adaptive size turned off, we use our subdivide slider to control the tessellation of the mesh. Undivide controls the degree of decimation when the mesh is being reduced. This is a global setting. These control all of the brushes. However, we can customize individual brushes. I think that Sculptris Pro works really well for sculpting on meshes that are decimated and ready for 3D print, because I can go in and spot correct areas or detail areas without vastly increasing my polygon count. I also tend to use it a lot if I have to clean scan data, which is always triangulated and always a little noisy. So I can clean up noise using Sculptris Pro mode, because it's just using triangles by default, so it's a great way to work on scan data. But when I do either of those, I need to customize my brushes. So I'll take the brush menu and tear this off. And under the brushes, we have Sculptris Pro. Now here I've got an option to use global. If I turn that off, for the standard brush, it will no longer be using these controls. It will be using these controls. Turn that back on. If I press the Shift key, that's my smooth brush. If I turn this off, I am now using these settings for my smooth brush, not the global settings. Now remember the global settings for the smooth brush. If we smooth an area with a large draw size, it's going to decimate that mesh. However, if I turn off use global, then I can come down here and I can turn my subdivide size down, turn off adaptive size, turn my subdivide size down. And now my smooth brush will increase resolution at a big draw size. So I may very well want to do that when I'm working on scan data that doesn't have a lot of detail but has a lot of noise in a certain area. I can increase my resolution in that area and then go in and clean it up and smooth it without having to rely on this control here, which is going to reduce as I'm sculpting. If I have a large area that I want to smooth, if I do it like this, it's going to reduce the polygons in that area, which is not always what we want. So let's take a look at another tool here. Let's say we've got a model that we want to tessimate. So this is just a regular sphere sculpture. It's got multiple subdivision levels. If I step down, it just came out of a polysphere. We have the ability under the geometry menu now to tessimate. Now what tessimate does is it will triangulate and tessellate the mesh, turning it into triangles, and then that's a great way to start from an existing model using Sculptris Pro mode. So if I leave polygon size to 1 and click tessimate, it tells me I need to delete my lower subdivision levels, which I'll do. So here I have tessellated it, and you see that I've actually lost a bit of detail. So I'll undo that, and I'll turn my polygon size down, and then it will tessellate it again. Now this time I've retained my detail. If we zoom in, you see we've got some nice triangulated surface. Now I can turn off tessellate and just use decimate here. So if I were to decimate the surface, you see it starts to simplify areas where it feels like I can get away with it. If I turn my polygon count up, it will decimate, but still maintain as much detail as it can, given the request for the polygon size I put in there. Now there's some brushes that are designed to work with Sculptris Pro mode. If I go to B for brush, S for snake, and grab snake sphere, for example, the snake sphere brush is a great brush for this. If you click and drag, it draws out these tubes. And we don't have to fuss around with curved brushes or curve mode. It's just simply clicking and dragging, similar to the snake hook brush, which it's actually based on. If I hold down the Alt key, I can actually push these in. If I turn my Z intensity down, there we go. It's behaving a little bit strange. Let me turn my Z intensity up a little bit higher than that. There we go. It's a little bit easier, I find, to work with because it can be really strong with the maximum Z intensity. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this to create some horns on this character. So I'll click and drag, and this is sort of dependent on brush pressure. So if I taper off my brush pressure, I can taper off the horn. But that's not really that necessary, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the smooth control here and I'm going to smooth this mesh down. So let's go to smooth. Let's go back to our settings up here and make sure that everything is set as normal. and go to frame mode, and let's turn our subdivide size up to 0.7. There we go. And I'm going to smooth these horns. Take the move brush, pull that out a little bit, turn my draw size up, and I'm going to sort of simplify the area down here at the base. Take the inflate brush and inflate the base here. Let me turn up my Z intensity. There we go. Do a little bit of smoothing there. And then I'll take my damn standard brush. And with the damn standard brush, I'll start to create some details here. Let's turn off frame mode so we can actually see it, where that horn is growing out of the surface. And that's created just using the snake sphere brush. Take my standard brush, and then I can sculpt in between those wrinkles just to make it feel like these are raised bits of skin around that horn base. And then we'll take our smooth brush and soften that area and reduce some of the polygon count there. Now for the horn itself, maybe I want to increase the resolution on the horn now, so I'll turn my draw size down and I'll smooth that area like so. Remember also that I can turn off adaptive size, and then I can just smooth like this, and that will increase the polygon count there. There we go. Now if I go to my standard brush and grab, say, alpha 58, I can use alpha 58 to create these sort of fine alpha details on the surface. And it's still tessellating. It's still in Sculptris Pro mode. It's just allowing me to spot apply this fine detail just in this area where I need it. Elsewhere, where I don't need that level of detail, it doesn't have that level of tessellation. If I turn off my X symmetry, I can come through here and I can add wrinkles through the brow like this, and it's only going to tessellate those areas where I'm using that alpha. As you can see, it's only adding that detail in the mesh where I need it. So turn my brush size down, go to frame mode, and let's set this back up to here. We could smooth that back a bit. There we go. So Sculptris Pro is an extremely powerful way of sketching in ZBrush. I think it's a unique way of working because, like I said before many times, it frees you from having to worry about any sort of mesh considerations. All we're doing is just sculpting form. And I think that's quite a bit of fun. I like working this way. Again, though, I treat it as a sketching tool. I start a model with it, but I wouldn't necessarily finish a model with it. I would get something started and then turn it into either a Dynamesh or a subdivision model. Just like I say in the Dynamesh chapter, I don't tend to take Dynamesh through to the end of a sculpture. I will use Dynamesh to start something, and then I will bounce it into a subdivision model, which is a process that I show in depth in that chapter. So I hope you found this video helpful and informative, and you can go forward now and start using Sculptris Pro in your own workflow. I think it's a wonderful way to open up a sphere and just do a lunchtime sketch at work, or anytime you just want to start noodling around in ZBrush, give it a go and see how it works for you. So thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video.